The morning mist hung thick over the River Dart as King Charles III stepped from his official car onto the pristine grounds of Britannia Royal Naval College. The year was 2023, and at 74 years old, the newly crowned monarch carried himself with the dignity befitting his station, yet there was something different about him today. Gone was the formal distance often associated with royal visits. Instead, Charles moved with the purposeful stride of a man who understood the sea and respected those who served upon it. Admiral Sir Ben Key, the first Sea Lord, waited at the entrance to the grand building, his uniform immaculate in the early morning light. Behind him stood a formation of the college's finest cadets, their young faces reflecting a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. They had been preparing for this moment for weeks, knowing that their sovereign would not merely be observing their training, but actively participating in it. Your Majesty. Admiral Key stepped forward with a crisp salute. Welcome to Britannia. The Lord High Admiral's division awaits your command. Charles returned the salute with military precision, a gesture that spoke of his own naval training decades earlier. Admiral Key, it's an honor to be here. I trust the cadets are ready for what lies ahead. Indeed, sir. They've been eager to demonstrate their capabilities under your leadership. As they walked through the college's historic corridors, Charles's mind wandered back to his own time as a young naval officer. The same portraits of distinguished admirals gazed down from the walls, and the same sense of tradition permeated every corner of the institution. Yet he knew that the Navy of today faced challenges his generation could hardly have imagined. Cyber warfare, climate change, and shifting global politics had transformed the nature of maritime defense. The Lord High Admiral's division was no ordinary unit. Established specifically for this visit, it comprised the most promising cadets from across the college, handpicked for their leadership potential and tactical acumen. These young men and women would one day command Britain's warships, and Charles understood the weight of responsibility that came with shaping their development. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell approached as they entered the main training facility. At 38, she was one of the youngest officers ever to be selected as an instructor at Britannia, her career marked by distinguished service in the Mediterranean and the South China Sea. Her expertise in modern naval warfare made her invaluable in preparing the next generation of officers. Your Majesty, she said, offering a respectful nod, I'll be serving as your tactical advisor during the exercises. The cadets have been briefed on the scenarios we'll be running, but they don't know the specific challenges you'll be presenting them with. Charles smiled slightly. Good. The best leaders are those who can adapt to the unexpected. Tell me about the cadets we'll be working with today. Mitchell consulted her tablet, pulling up profiles of the 18 cadets who made up the division. We have representatives from across the Commonwealth, sir. There's Cadet Williams from Wales, showing exceptional promise in naval engineering. Cadet Singh from India has demonstrated remarkable tactical thinking. Cadet Thompson from Canada has natural leadership abilities that set her apart from her peers. As they continued through the facility, Charles took note of the advanced simulation equipment that surrounded them. Massive screens displayed real-time maritime traffic from around the globe, while sophisticated computer systems could recreate any naval scenario imaginable. It was a far cry from the basic training aids he had known in his youth. The briefing room buzzed with quiet conversation as the cadets waited for their sovereign's arrival. Each had been selected not just for their academic performance, but for their potential to handle the pressure of command. They represented the future of the Royal Navy, young minds eager to prove themselves worthy of the trust placed in them. Cadet Rebecca Thompson stood near the front of the group, her Canadian accent barely detectable after months of training at Britannia. At 22, she had already shown herself to be a natural leader, someone her fellow cadets instinctively turned to in moments of crisis. Her background in marine engineering gave her a practical understanding of how ships operated that complemented her strategic thinking. I wonder what he'll have us do, whispered Cadet James Williams, nervously adjusting his uniform. The young Welshman had excelled in every technical assessment, but still struggled with the confidence required for command decisions. Whatever it is, we'll handle it, Thompson replied quietly. Remember, this isn't just about impressing the king. It's about proving to ourselves that we're ready for the responsibility of command. The door opened, and the room fell silent as King Charles entered, followed by Admiral Key and Lieutenant Commander Mitchell. The cadets snapped to attention, their training evident in the precision of their movements. "At ease," Charles said, his voice carrying easily across the room. "Please be seated. We have important work ahead of us." As the cadets settled into their chairs, Charles moved to the front of the room, studying each face before beginning to speak. "You are here because you represent the finest naval talent of your generation. Today, you'll have the opportunity to demonstrate not just what you've learned, but how you think, how you lead, and how you adapt when circumstances change." He gestured toward the large display screen that dominated one wall of the briefing room. "Our scenario begins in the Mediterranean Sea, where tensions have been rising between several regional powers. Intelligence suggests that a crisis may be imminent, one that could threaten vital shipping lanes and endanger civilian populations." The screen flickered to life, showing a detailed map of the Mediterranean with various naval units marked in different colors. Charles continued his briefing, explaining the complex political situation that had developed between fictional nations, each based on real-world challenges the Royal Navy might face. "Your mission," he said, "is to command a task force that must maintain peace while protecting British interests and civilian shipping. You'll face decisions that have no clear right or wrong answers, situations where the textbook solutions may not apply." Cadet Singh raised his hand, a questioning expression on his face. "Sir, will we be operating under current rules of engagement, or will the scenario include modified protocols?" "An excellent question," Charles replied. "You'll be working with standard NATO protocols, but remember that real-world situations often require commanders to interpret those rules in ways their authors never anticipated. Your judgment will be as important as your technical knowledge." Lieutenant Commander Mitchell stepped forward, activating a series of additional displays. "The exercise will unfold in real time over the next several hours. You'll receive intelligence updates, face unexpected developments, and need to coordinate with allied forces represented by our simulation systems." Charles watched as the cadets absorbed this information, noting how they instinctively began to organize themselves into working groups. Leadership hierarchies were already emerging, with some cadets naturally taking charge while others positioned themselves as specialists ready to provide expert advice. "Before we begin," Charles said, "I want you to understand something important. The decisions you make today, even in simulation, will help prepare you for moments when lives depend on your judgment. The Royal Navy has always been built on the principle that our officers must be ready to act decisively, even when the stakes are highest." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "I've had the privilege of commanding at sea, and I can tell you that no amount of training fully prepares you for the weight of that responsibility. But training like this gives you the foundation you need to trust your instincts when the moment comes." The briefing continued for another hour, with Charles outlining the specific roles each cadet would play in the exercise. Some would serve as ship commanders, others as department heads, or specialists in areas like communications, weapons systems, or logistics. The complexity of the scenario required them to work together in ways that mirrored the reality of modern naval operations. As the cadets filed out of the briefing room to take their positions at various simulation stations, Charles remained behind with Admiral Key and Lieutenant Commander Mitchell. The real test was about to begin, and he wanted to ensure that the exercise would provide maximum benefit to these future officers. "They seem well prepared," he observed, watching through the window as the cadets moved purposefully through the facility. "Tell me, how realistic can we make this scenario?" Mitchell smiled. "Very realistic, sir. Our systems can simulate everything from equipment failures to political interference from home. We can even introduce communication delays and jamming to replicate the fog of war." "Good," Charles replied. "These young people will face challenges we can barely imagine. The more realistic their training, the better equipped they'll be to handle whatever comes their way." Admiral Key nodded in agreement. "The geopolitical situation is more complex than it's been in decades, sir. Our future commanders need to understand not just tactics and strategy, but diplomacy, economics, and the human factors that drive conflict. As they made their way to the command center, where Charles would oversee the exercise, he reflected on the changes he had witnessed in his lifetime. The Navy of his youth had been focused primarily on the Cold War threat, with clear lines between friend and foe. Today's naval officers needed to navigate a world where the threats were often ambiguous, where the line between military and civilian operations was increasingly blurred. The command center hummed with activity as the cadets took their positions. Multiple screens showed the Mediterranean scenario from different perspectives, while communication systems allowed for real-time coordination between the various simulated units. It was an impressive display of modern training technology, but Charles knew that the real test lay in how the cadets would use these tools. "Simulation active," announced the technical supervisor. "All stations report ready." Charles settled into the observer's chair, but he knew he wouldn't remain passive for long. The scenario had been designed to require his input at key moments, forcing the cadets to work directly with their sovereign as they navigated the complex challenges ahead. The first phase of the exercise began calmly enough. The cadets efficiently established their command structure, with Cadet Thompson naturally emerging as the overall task force commander. Her Canadian pragmatism and engineering background served her well as she organized the various specialists under her command. "Intelligence update incoming," announced the simulation controller. On the main screen, new information appeared showing increased military activity in the eastern Mediterranean. A convoy of civilian cargo ships had reported being shadowed by unmarked patrol boats, while satellite imagery suggested a military buildup on several islands. Charles watched as the cadets processed this information, noting how they instinctively turned to their specialists for analysis, while Thompson coordinated the overall response. It was exactly the kind of collaborative leadership the modern Navy required. "Sir," Cadet Williams called out from his position at the engineering station, "I'm showing increased fuel consumption across the task force. If we maintain current patrol patterns, we'll need to refuel earlier than planned." "Thank you, Williams," Thompson responded immediately. "Singh, what are our logistics options?" The Indian cadet quickly consulted his displays before responding. "We have two choices, ma'am. We can rendezvous with the supply ship HMS Tide Spring in 6 hours, or we can put in a Malta for emergency refueling. The latter option would take us out of patrol area for approximately 8 hours. Charles leaned forward, interested to see how Thompson would handle this early decision. It was exactly the kind of real-world complication that separated good officers from great ones. "What's your assessment of the threat level?" Thompson asked, addressing the question to the group. "Elevated, but not immediate," replied Cadet Harrison from the intelligence station. "The unmarked boats are maintaining distance from the civilian convoy. They appear to be observing rather than threatening." Thompson considered for a moment before making her decision. "We'll rendezvous with Tide Spring. I don't want to leave the patrol area undefended if the situation escalates." Charles nodded approvingly. It was a sound decision that balanced operational needs with tactical requirements. But he knew the scenario was about to become much more complicated. 20 minutes later, the simulation threw its first major curveball. The main screen flashed red as new intelligence arrived, indicating that one of the civilian cargo ships had sent a distress signal before going silent. At the same time, radar contacts suggested that several fast-moving craft were approaching the area. "Ma'am," called out the communications operator, "we've lost contact with the merchant vessel MV Atlantic Prosperity. Last known position was grid reference Echo 7. The command center fell silent for a moment as the cadets absorbed this development. Charles could see the weight of command settling on Thompson's shoulders as she realized that lives might now be at stake. "All stations, this is Cadet Commander Thompson," she announced, her voice steady despite the pressure. "We are implementing Alert Condition 2. All units proceed to maximum readiness." The simulation accelerated as the cadets worked to respond to the crisis. Ship movements were plotted, communication protocols implemented, and rules of engagement reviewed. Charles watched with growing admiration as these young officers demonstrated the training and instincts that would serve them well in real-world situations. But the scenario was far from over, and the most challenging decisions still lay ahead. The tension in the command center was palpable as the simulation continued to unfold. King Charles observed from his position as the cadets worked frantically to locate the missing merchant vessel. Their training was being put to the ultimate test, and he could see both the pressure and the excitement in their faces as they embraced the challenge. "Your Majesty," Lieutenant Commander Mitchell whispered, "this is where we typically see leadership hierarchies either strengthen or collapse. The next 30 minutes will tell us a great deal about these cadets." Charles nodded, his attention focused on Cadet Thompson as she coordinated the search and rescue operation. The young Canadian had maintained her composure admirably, but he could see the strain beginning to show as the complexity of the situation increased. Helicopter asset Papa 7 reports visual contact with debris field at grid Echo 7 Alpha, announced the communications operator. No signs of survivors visible from current altitude. A collective intake of breath swept through the command center. Even though this was a simulation, the cadets were responding as if real lives hung in the balance. Charles felt a surge of pride at their professionalism and dedication. "Request Papa 7 maintain overwatch and coordinate with HMS Defender for surface search," Thompson ordered. "Williams, I need a damage assessment team ready for immediate deployment." "Aye, ma'am," Williams responded from his engineering station. "Damage control teams Alpha and Bravo standing by for helicopter transport." But the scenario controller wasn't finished with his surprises. A new message flashed across the communication screens, this one bearing the highest priority classification. Charles leaned forward as he read the briefing that would change everything about the exercise. "All stations, priority message from Fleet Command," the operator announced. "Intelligence indicates the missing merchant vessel was carrying sensitive cargo. Repeat, sensitive cargo. Recovery is now highest priority." The implications of this development rippled through the command center. What had begun as a straightforward search and rescue operation was now potentially something much more significant. Charles watched as the cadets quickly adapted their thinking to this new information. "Ma'am," called out Cadet Singh from the intelligence station, "I'm cross-referencing the vessel manifest with classified cargo databases." The Atlantic Prosperity was carrying advanced navigation equipment bound for a NATO installation. "Equipment that cannot fall into the wrong hands," added Cadet Harrison, pulling up additional intelligence reports. "If those unmarked patrol boats we detected earlier are involved, we could be looking at a recovery operation under hostile observation." Thompson's mind raced as she processed this information. The exercise had evolved from crisis management to a complex military operation with diplomatic implications. She glanced toward King Charles, seeking some sign of guidance, but found only an expectant expression that told her the decisions remained hers to make. "Singh, what's our current tactical picture?" she asked, buying herself time to think through the options. 3 HMS vessels in immediate area, including our flagship HMS Defender. The unmarked patrol boats have maintained their distance, but haven't departed the area. Weather conditions are deteriorating, with sea state increasing to force 4. Charles was impressed by how quickly the cadets were adapting to the changing situation. Their training had prepared them for exactly this kind of fluid operational environment, where initial objectives could change rapidly based on new intelligence. "Ma'am," Williams interjected from his engineering station, "if we're going to attempt a recovery operation in these sea conditions, I recommend we do it soon. The weather front approaching from the west will make underwater operations extremely difficult in 4 hours." Thompson made her decision. "All stations, we are implementing Operation Deep Sweep. HMS Defender will coordinate the recovery effort while HMS Dragon and HMS Diamond maintain protective overwatch. All units maintain alert condition 2. The command center burst into activity as the cadets executed Thompson's orders. Communication protocols were established, diving teams were briefed, and protective formations were arranged. Charles noted with satisfaction how naturally the young officers had assumed their roles, each contributing their expertise to the overall mission success. But the simulation had one more surprise waiting. As the recovery operation began in earnest, a new radar contact appeared on the screens. This one was different from the patrol boats they had been tracking. Larger, faster, and heading directly toward their position. New contact bearing 270, range 12 nautical miles, reported the radar operator. Classification unknown, but signature suggests military vessel of frigate class. The tension ratcheted up another notch. What had been a recovery operation under observation was now potentially a confrontation with an unidentified military vessel. Charles could see the weight of command settling even more heavily on Thompson's shoulders. "Challenge the unknown vessel," Thompson ordered. "Request identification and intention." Challenging on Channel 16, the communications operator confirmed. "Unknown vessel. Unknown vessel. This is HMS Defender. Identify yourself and state your intentions." The response came back in accented English, delivered with military precision. "HMS Defender. This is Warship Zephyr of the Adriatic Maritime Force. We are conducting lawful maritime patrol in international waters." Charles recognized the fictional nation from the exercise briefing. The Adriatic Maritime Force represented a regional power with complex relationships to NATO, sometimes cooperative but often pursuing its own agenda. The presence of their warship added a significant diplomatic dimension to the scenario. "Ma'am," whispered Singh, "intelligence files show the Adriatic Maritime Force has been increasingly aggressive in asserting territorial claims. They may consider this area within their sphere of influence." Thompson faced a classic naval dilemma. She could assert her right to operate in international waters and continue the recovery mission, potentially escalating tensions with a regional power. Or she could withdraw, abandoning vital NATO equipment to avoid confrontation. Neither option was entirely satisfactory. "What's your assessment, Williams?" she asked, turning to her engineering specialist. "The recovery operation is proceeding, but slowly. Our divers report the wreckage is scattered across a wide area. We need at least 2 more hours to ensure we've located all sensitive materials." "Singh, what do we know about Adriatic Maritime Force capabilities?" "Their frigate Zephyr is modern and well-equipped, roughly equivalent to our Type 23 frigates. In a purely military sense, our 3 vessels would have the advantage, but any engagement would have serious diplomatic consequences." Charles was fascinated by how the cadets were weighing not just tactical factors, but the broader implications of their decisions. This was exactly the kind of complex thinking modern naval officers needed to develop. Thompson made another command decision. "Open a direct channel to Zephyr. I want to speak with their commanding officer." "Channel open, ma'am," the communications operator confirmed. "Warship Zephyr. This is the commanding officer of HMS Defender. I request a direct conversation between commanding officers." The response came after a brief delay. "HMS Defender. This is Captain Moravec of AMF Zephyr. I acknowledge your request." Thompson took a deep breath before speaking. "Captain Moravec, we are conducting a search and rescue operation following a maritime accident. We have no hostile intentions and are operating in accordance with international maritime law." "Understood. HMS Defender. However, my government has concerns about NATO military activities in this region. I am under orders to monitor your operations and ensure they do not threaten regional security." The diplomatic chess game had begun. Charles watched with growing admiration as Thompson navigated between asserting her mission requirements and avoiding unnecessary escalation. It was a delicate balance that required both military professionalism and diplomatic skill. "Captain Moravec," Thompson continued, "I appreciate your government's concerns. Would you be willing to observe our search and rescue operations? Transparency might address your security concerns while allowing us to complete our humanitarian mission." There was a longer pause before Moravec responded. "That is an interesting proposal, HMS Defender. I will consult with my headquarters and provide you with an answer shortly." Charles couldn't help but smile at Thompson's diplomatic maneuvering. She had found a potential solution that addressed both sides' concerns while maintaining the mission's primary objective. It was exactly the kind of creative thinking the Royal Navy needed from its future leaders. While they waited for the Adriatic response, the recovery operation continued beneath the waves. The diving teams had located the main debris field and were systematically cataloging and recovering the sensitive equipment. But the deteriorating weather was making their job increasingly difficult. "Ma'am," reported Williams, "diving operations are becoming marginal due to sea conditions. The teams are requesting permission to continue, but safety margins are decreasing." Another difficult decision for Thompson to make. The equipment recovery was vital, but she had a responsibility for the safety of her personnel. Charles could see her weighing the competing priorities, understanding that every decision would be scrutinized and analyzed. "How much longer do the diving teams need?" she asked. "Estimated 45 minutes to complete recovery of all priority items," Williams replied. "Weather front will reach our position in approximately 60 minutes. Maintain diving operations, but implement enhanced safety protocols," Thompson decided. "If conditions deteriorate further, we evacuate immediately." The response from Captain Moravec came 20 minutes later. "H se defender, I'm F-Sefir. My headquarters has approved observation of your operations. I will maintain position at 5 nautical miles distance, with your permission." "Approved, Captain Moravec. Thank you for your cooperation." Charles was impressed by how the exercise had evolved. What began as a simple training scenario had become a complex multidimensional challenge that tested not just military skills, but diplomatic judgment, crisis management, and leadership under pressure. The diving teams worked with increasing urgency as the weather continued to deteriorate. One by one, the priority items were recovered and secured aboard HMS Defender. The sensitive navigation equipment that had triggered this entire operation was finally located and brought to the surface. "Final item recovered," Williams announced with obvious relief. "All priority cargo accounted for and secured." "Excellent work," Thompson replied, then turned her attention back to the broader tactical situation. "All units, prepare for departure. We'll maintain formation until clear of the immediate area." But the simulation controller had saved the most challenging decision for last. As the British task force prepared to depart, a new emergency signal appeared on the screens. A civilian yacht, caught in the deteriorating weather, was requesting immediate assistance. "Yacht Serenity Broadcasting Mayday," reported the communications operator. "2 persons aboard. Engine failure, taking on water. Position 4 nautical miles southeast of our current location." Thompson stared at the display screen, realizing that her mission was far from over. The recovery operation had been successful, but now civilian lives were genuinely at risk. The weather that had complicated the military operation was proving potentially fatal for the yacht's occupants. "Ma'am," Singh reported urgently, "the yacht's position is in disputed waters. The Adriatic Maritime Force might consider a rescue attempt by HMS vessels as a territorial incursion." Charles leaned forward, eager to see how Thompson would handle this final challenge. The exercise had presented her with increasingly difficult decisions, each building on the consequences of the previous choices. Now she faced a situation where military objectives, diplomatic concerns, and humanitarian obligations all conflicted. "Open a channel to Captain Moravec," Thompson ordered. "Captain Moravec, this is HMS Defender. We have received a civilian distress call from your territorial waters. Request permission to provide humanitarian assistance." The response came quickly. "HMS Defender, I acknowledge the distress call. However, my orders are clear regarding NATO vessels entering our territorial waters." Thompson closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of command more heavily than ever. 2 civilians were in mortal danger, but a rescue attempt could spark an international incident. Yet doing nothing while people drowned was unthinkable for any naval officer. "Captain Moravec," she said finally, "I am prepared to transfer command of the rescue operation to your vessel if you have the capability to respond immediately. Time is critical." Another pause, then Moravec's voice returned with a different tone. "HMS Defender, AMF Zephyr does not currently have rescue capability deployed. I I request your assistance with this humanitarian emergency. Charles felt a surge of pride as he watched Thompson's response to this breakthrough. She had found a way to save lives while allowing the Adriatic captain to maintain his dignity and satisfy his orders. Understood, Captain Moravec. We are proceeding to assist the civilian vessel under your authority. HMS Dragon launching helicopter rescue team immediately. The final phase of the exercise unfolded rapidly. The British helicopter reached the yacht just as it was being overwhelmed by the heavy seas. Both civilians were successfully rescued and transferred to HMS Defender for medical treatment. Captain Moravec maintained his position throughout the operation, officially supervising the rescue while ensuring there were no territorial violations. Exercise complete, announced the simulation controller. All objectives achieved, all personnel accounted for. The command center erupted in cheers and applause as the cadets realized they had successfully navigated every challenge thrown at them. Charles rose from his observation chair, his face showing the satisfaction of a monarch who had witnessed the very best of his naval service. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying clearly over the celebration, "you have just demonstrated why the Royal Navy continues to be the finest maritime force in the world. Your professionalism, creativity, and dedication to both mission and humanitarian values represent the best traditions of naval service." Thompson stepped forward, still processing the intensity of the experience. "Your Majesty, thank you for this opportunity. The challenges we face today, they felt real. They felt important. They were important," Charles replied. "Every decision you made, every solution you found, contributes to your development as naval officers. The challenges you'll face in the real world may be different, but the principles remain the same: competence, courage, and compassion." As the cadets began to relax and discuss their experiences, Charles reflected on what he had witnessed. These young officers had faced complex challenges that required them to balance military effectiveness with diplomatic sensitivity, operational requirements with humanitarian obligations. They had performed magnificently, proving that the future of the Royal Navy remained in excellent hands. The exercise had been a success beyond his expectations, but Charles knew this was just the beginning of their development as naval leaders. Hashtag King Charles commands the Lord High Admiral's Division at Britannia Royal Naval College. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Britannia Royal Naval College grounds as King Charles walked with the cadets toward the next phase of their training. The morning's intense simulation had tested their crisis management abilities, but Charles had designed the day's program to challenge them in entirely different ways. The transformation from high-tech command center to the college's historic seamanship training facilities represented a deliberate shift from modern warfare to timeless naval fundamentals. "Your Majesty," Cadet Thompson asked as they walked, "what should we expect from this next exercise?" Charles smiled, remembering his own days learning the basics of seamanship. The finest naval officers understand that all the technology in the world cannot replace fundamental skills. You've proven you can handle complex scenarios with computer assistance. Now we'll see how well you perform when it's just you, your crew, and the sea. The group approached the college's sailing fleet, where several traditional naval cutters bobbed gently at their moorings. These weren't the sleek modern vessels that would carry the cadets into their operational careers, but robust training craft designed to teach the essential skills of seamanship that had remained unchanged for centuries. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell waited beside the lead cutter, her expression serious as she reviewed the afternoon's training plan. "The weather conditions are ideal for advanced seamanship training," she reported to Charles. "Moderate winds, good visibility, but enough challenge to test their skills." Charles nodded approvingly. "Perfect. These officers need to understand that commanding a ship requires more than tactical knowledge. They must develop an intuitive understanding of how vessels behave in the water, how crews work together under pressure, and how leadership manifests itself in the most basic maritime operations." The cadets gathered around as Charles began his briefing for the afternoon session. Unlike the high-tech presentations of the morning, this instruction took place on the dock, with the gentle sound of water lapping against the hulls providing a natural soundtrack. Seamanship, Charles began, is the foundation upon which all naval expertise is built. You can master the most sophisticated weapons systems and understand complex tactical doctrines, but if you cannot handle a ship in difficult conditions, you cannot be truly effective naval officers. He gestured toward the cutters arranged before them. These vessels will be your teachers this afternoon. You'll work in teams of 6, with each team taking command of a cutter for a series of practical exercises. The scenarios will test not just your technical skills, but your ability to lead and work as a crew under challenging conditions. Cadet Williams raised his hand, his Welsh accent more pronounced when he was nervous. Sir, will we be rotating command positions during the exercises? Excellent question, Charles replied. Each of you will have the opportunity to command, but more importantly, you'll all experience what it means to serve under pressure as part of a crew. The best commanders are those who understand every aspect of their ship's operation. The cadets were divided into 3 teams, with Thompson, Singh, and Harrison each designated as initial team leaders. Charles had chosen these assignments carefully, wanting to see how different leadership styles would emerge under practical conditions. The afternoon would reveal aspects of their characters that no simulation could duplicate. As the teams prepared their vessels for departure, Charles took his place aboard the lead cutter with Thompson's team. His presence added an undeniable gravity to the exercise, but he was careful to position himself as an observer rather than an active participant. This was their training, and they needed to learn to rely on their own judgment and abilities. Cast off forward, Thompson called out, her voice carrying the authority she had developed during the morning's exercise. The cutter's crew responded with practiced efficiency, each member understanding their role in the complex dance of getting underway. The first exercise was deceptively simple, a basic navigation challenge that required each team to follow a predetermined course through a series of marked buoys. What made it challenging was that they would be doing so under sail power only, with no engine assistance permitted. In an age of GPS navigation and computer-controlled propulsion, this exercise forced the cadets back to fundamentals. Winds coming from the southwest at about 15 knots, observed Cadet Davies, Thompson's designated navigator. We'll need to tack twice to clear the first mark. Agreed, Thompson replied, studying the wind direction and the position of the buoys. Williams, how's our sail trim? Williams, serving as sailing master for this evolution, checked the set of the mainsail and jib. Good shape, ma'am, but I recommend easing the main sheet slightly as we come onto the wind. Charles watched with interest as the team worked together to optimize their vessel's performance. These young officers were learning lessons that their predecessors had mastered on the same waters for over a century. The principles of wind, current, and crew coordination were timeless, unaffected by advances in technology. The 3 cutters began their navigation exercise, each following slightly different courses toward the first mark. Charles could see the competitive spirit emerging as the teams realized they were essentially racing, each wanting to demonstrate superior seamanship skills. Coming about, Thompson announced as her cutter approached the first tacking point. Ready about. The crew responded instantly. Sheets were released and reset, and the cutter smoothly changed course onto the new tack. It was executed with textbook precision, but Charles noted that Singh's team had gained slightly by choosing a more aggressive angle that allowed them to clear the mark on a single long tack. Ma'am, called out Davies, Singh's crew is taking a different approach to the second mark. They're running deeper than our planned course. Thompson studied the tactical situation, weighing the advantages of following Singh's route against sticking with her original plan. It was exactly the kind of real-time decision-making that distinguished good officers from great ones. Maintain our course, she decided. The wind's been shifty all afternoon. If it backs another 10 degrees, we'll have the advantage. Charles smiled at the decision. Thompson was learning to trust her initial analysis while remaining flexible enough to adapt if conditions changed. It was a crucial skill for any naval commander. The exercise continued with increasing complexity as the afternoon progressed. The second evolution required the teams to conduct man-overboard drills using traditional seamanship techniques. No modern recovery systems were permitted. Everything had to be accomplished using basic sailing skills and crew coordination. "Man overboard, starboard side," called out the exercise controller from the safety boat. A practice dummy was thrown into the water, and the clock began ticking as each team raced to execute a proper recovery sequence. Harrison's team, bringing up the rear after a poor start to the navigation exercise, suddenly demonstrated exceptional crew work as they performed a textbook Williamson turn, bringing their cutter back to the casualty position with impressive speed and precision. "Excellent work," Charles murmured to Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, who was observing from a nearby safety boat. Harrison may have been struggling with command presence during the morning exercise, but his crew obviously trusts his seamanship skills. "That's often how leadership develops," Mitchell replied. "Competence breeds confidence, which in turn inspires others to follow." Harrison needed a chance to demonstrate what he knows rather than just process information. The final exercise of the afternoon proved to be the most challenging. Each team was required to anchor their cutter in a precise position using only traditional techniques, then conduct a series of boat handling evolutions that tested every aspect of their seamanship skills. The wind had increased slightly during the afternoon, and the current was running stronger as the tide changed. What had been manageable conditions earlier were now genuinely challenging, requiring the cadets to demonstrate real skill rather than simply following procedures. "Prepare to anchor," Thompson called out as her cutter approached the designated position. "Williams, how's our approach speed?" "Good speed, ma'am, but we're fighting the current more than I expected," Williams replied from his position near the bow. "I recommend coming a bit more to starboard to compensate." Thompson adjusted course slightly, feeling the cutter's response through the tiller in her hands. This was leadership at its most fundamental level, making constant small adjustments based on direct sensory input and crew feedback. The anchor splashed into the water right on target, and the cutter swung smoothly into the current as the anchor line paid out. It was a perfect evolution that demonstrated the team's growing coordination and Thompson's developing command presence. "Nicely done," Charles said quietly, genuinely impressed by the precision of the maneuver. That kind of boat handling comes from understanding how all the elements work together. But the exercise wasn't finished. The teams now had to conduct a series of precision maneuvers while anchored, including lowering and recovering the ship's boat, transferring personnel between vessels, and conducting basic maintenance tasks. All of this had to be accomplished while maintaining position against the wind and current. Singh's team encountered their first significant challenge during the boat transfer evolution. As they attempted to lower their ship's boat, a sudden wind shift caught them unprepared, causing the small craft to swing dangerously close to the cutter's hull. "Fend off," Singh called out, but his crew was momentarily confused about who should take action. In those few seconds of uncertainty, Charles could see how quickly seamanship situations could become dangerous. Cadet Patel, serving as Singh's boat crew leader, took immediate action, grabbing a boat hook and pushing the small craft clear of the cutter's side. It was a close call that reminded everyone that traditional seamanship carried real risks that required constant attention and quick thinking. "Well handled," Singh acknowledged, but Charles could see the incident had shaken the young officer's confidence. It was a valuable lesson about the unforgiving nature of the sea and the importance of maintaining situational awareness at all times. As the afternoon exercises concluded, the three teams began the process of returning to harbor. The wind had continued to increase, and the approach to the college's dock system required careful coordination to avoid collisions or damage. Thompson's team was first to enter the harbor approach, and Charles watched with interest as she dealt with the challenging conditions. The wind was now gusting irregularly, making it difficult to maintain precise control as they maneuvered into the narrow channel leading to the docks. "Drop the jib," Thompson ordered as they approached the entrance. "We'll use main power only from here in." It was a wise decision that reduced the sail area while maintaining enough power for steering control. The cutter responded smoothly to her commands as they navigated between the harbor markers, demonstrating that Thompson had truly internalized the lessons of the afternoon. Singh's team followed closely behind, their earlier difficulty with the boat transfer having motivated them to execute a flawless harbor approach. Charles noted how quickly the cadets learned from their mistakes, adapting their techniques to avoid repeating errors. Harrison's team brought up the rear, but their approach was methodical and precise. The confidence he had gained during the man overboard exercise had carried through to all subsequent evolutions, and his crew worked with the smooth coordination that marked truly effective teams. As the cutters were secured to their moorings and the sails properly stowed, Charles gathered the cadets for a debrief of the afternoon's activities. The setting sun painted the harbor in golden hues, providing a dramatic backdrop for reflection on the day's experiences. "What did you learn this afternoon that you couldn't have learned in the simulator?" Charles asked, genuinely curious about their perspectives. Cadet Williams was the first to respond. "The immediate feedback, sir. In the simulator, if you make a mistake, you can reset or modify the scenario. Out here, if you misjudge the wind or current, you have to deal with the consequences immediately." "Exactly right," Charles replied. "Real seamanship requires developing an intuitive understanding of how ships behave. That only comes from experience." Thompson added her own observation. "I noticed how much more important crew coordination became when we were dealing with actual wind and waves. In the simulator, we could focus on individual tasks. Out here, everything affected everything else." Singh nodded in agreement, clearly thinking about his team's difficulties during the boat transfer. "The margin for error is much smaller in real conditions. Small mistakes can cascade into major problems very quickly." Charles was pleased with their insights. "These are exactly the lessons we hoped you would learn. Modern naval officers need to understand that no amount of technology can replace fundamental seamanship skills. The sea hasn't changed, even if our ships have." As they walked back toward the college buildings, Charles reflected on how the cadets had performed during both phases of the day's training. The morning simulation had tested their ability to handle complex scenarios using modern systems and procedures. The afternoon's seamanship training had challenged them to demonstrate mastery of timeless fundamentals. Both sets of skills would be essential for their future careers, but Charles knew that the afternoon's lessons would serve them throughout their lives. The confidence that came from truly understanding how ships behaved in the water, how crews worked together under pressure, and how leadership manifested itself in practical situations would be invaluable in any circumstances they might face. "Your Majesty," Lieutenant Commander Mitchell approached as they neared the college. "The evening evolution is prepared whenever you're ready to proceed." Charles checked his watch, noting that they were running slightly ahead of schedule. "Excellent. The cadets have earned a brief rest before we begin the final phase of today's training." The final evolution would be different from both the morning's high-tech simulation and the afternoon's traditional seamanship training. Charles had designed it to synthesize everything the cadets had learned while presenting them with entirely new challenges that would test their adaptability and creative thinking. As they entered the college for dinner before the evening session, Charles felt a deep satisfaction with the day's progress. The Lord High Admiral's division had proven themselves capable of handling both modern warfare scenarios and traditional seamanship challenges. The evening would reveal whether they could integrate these diverse skills into true naval leadership. The dining hall buzzed with animated conversation as the cadets discussed their experiences and prepared mentally for whatever challenges the evening might bring. Charles listened to their discussions with interest, noting how naturally they had begun to think like naval officers rather than students. The transformation was remarkable and gratifying. These young people were developing the confidence and competence that would serve them throughout their careers. More importantly, they were learning to trust each other and work as an integrated team regardless of the challenges they faced. The evening session would push them even further, but Charles was confident they were ready for whatever tests lay ahead.